The note was 4 sentences long, and I could recite all four from memory for 15 years without ever once really reading them. That is the strange thing about grief, and about a note like that. You hold it so many times that it stops being words and becomes a kind of wound you touch, a smooth, worn place you press to feel the pain and confirm it is still there. I must have held my husband's suicide note 1,000 times over 15 years. I did not read it a single one of those times. Not really. Not until the afternoon everything changed. My name is Loretta. I am 62 years old. I live in Terre Haute, Indiana. And 15 years ago, my husband Paul was found dead in the office of the company he had built, with a note in his own handwriting on the desk beside him. And the coroner ruled it a suicide, and everyone who loved us accepted it. And so, eventually, did I. I want to tell you the whole of it slowly and in order, because this is a story where one small word carried the entire truth. And if you do not understand how I came to overlook that word for 15 years, you will not understand how a thing so obvious could hide so long in plain sight. Paul and I were married for 26 years before he died. He was not a perfect man, but he was my man, steady and stubborn, and prouder of the business he built than of almost anything except our 2 daughters. The business was a regional distribution company, unglamorous, trucks and warehouses and contracts. But Paul had started it from nothing with a partner named Gerald, and over 20 years, the two of them had built it into something genuinely valuable, something worth a great deal of money by the time it all happened. Gerald was Paul's best friend from college. He was best man at our wedding. He was godfather to our older daughter. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters to everything that comes after. Gerald was family. Let me tell you about the name thing, because it is the whole of this story, and I want you to feel how deep it went. The night Paul and I met, at a friend's cookout when we were both 24, someone introduced me as Lori, and Paul shook my hand and said, "Is that short for something?" And I said Loretta, and he said, "Then I'll call you Loretta, if that's all right, because it's a shame to shorten something that nice." I thought it was a line. It was not a line. For 26 years that man called me Loretta, and only Loretta, through every fight and every tender night and every ordinary Tuesday, and it became one of the small private architectures of a marriage, the kind of thing no one outside the two of you even knows exists. My daughters knew, vaguely, that Dad called Mom by her full name. They did not think about it. Why would anyone think about it? It was just a thing about their parents, wallpaper, invisible. It was invisible to everyone in the world except Paul and me. Remember that. There is a version of this story where the name means nothing, and I made myself consider it, honestly, later, when I was trying not to be a grief-crazed widow inventing a murder. Could Paul, in the extremity of suicide, have reverted to the common name, the world's name for me, as some final surrender of the private world we had built? I turned that over for a long time, and I rejected it, not out of stubbornness, but out of knowledge, because I knew the man. In extremity, Paul went more himself, not less. When his own father died, Paul wrote me a note so purely, achingly, him, that I still cannot read it. The idea that in the most Paul moment imaginable, his last, he would suddenly write like a stranger who knew me casually, that is not surrender. That is impossibility. The name was not a slip. The name was a fingerprint, and it was not his. In the last year of Paul's life, something had gone wrong between the two of them, and Paul would not tell me what. I knew only that he came home tense and quiet, that there were phone calls he took in the garage, that twice I heard him arguing with Gerald in a low, furious voice he never used with anyone. When I asked, Paul told me it was business, that there was a disagreement about the direction of the company, about a buyout offer that had come in, and that I should not worry, that he would handle it. I did not push. I have spent 15 years wishing I had pushed, because the disagreement, I would eventually learn, was very simple. There was an offer to sell the company for a large sum, and Paul did not want to sell, and Gerald did. The morning Paul died was an ordinary morning. He kissed me, he was quiet. He went to the office early, which was not unusual. He often went in before the warehouse crews to do paperwork in the silence. And a little after 9, his office manager found him at his desk, gone. And there was a handgun that I had not even known he owned. And there was the note. 4 sentences, in Paul's handwriting, on a sheet of the company letterhead. The police came, and it was, they said, very straightforward. A man under financial and business stress, a private gun, a note in his own hand, a locked building he had entered alone. There was no sign of anyone else. There was no reason to think anything but the obvious. I have replayed that morning more times than I can count, and the detail that haunts me now is that Paul kissed me goodbye. It was not a dramatic morning. He was quiet, yes, but he kissed me at the door the way he did every day, and he said he would see me tonight, and he took his travel mug of coffee, and he drove off into an ordinary Tuesday. Men who are about to end their lives do not, as a rule, take their coffee mug. It is such a small thing, the coffee mug, but it sat wrong in me for 15 years, without my ever letting it fully surface, because a man planning to die does not pour himself a to-go coffee for the road. He said he would see me tonight. And he meant it, because he was not planning to die. He was planning to go to the office and keep fighting Gerald about the sale, the way he had been for a year, and instead he walked into a room with the one person who had decided that fight was going to end that morning, one way or another. And the note. Oh, the note. I need to tell you what it said, because the whole of this story lives inside those 4 sentences. It read, "I am so sorry for what I am about to do. I have made a mess of everything, and I cannot see a way out. Please tell the girls I loved them more than my life. Goodbye, my darling Lori." That was it. That was the last thing my husband ever said to me, and I read it at the worst moment of my life through a curtain of horror and grief, and I did not see, because I could not possibly have been looking, the thing that was wrong with it. The thing that was wrong with it was one word. And it took me 15 years to see the word, because for 15 years I never once read the note as a document. I only ever pressed it like a bruise. You have to understand how a note like that works on a fresh widow, how it functions almost as a spell. It arrives at the exact moment your mind cannot work, and it answers the only question you are capable of forming, which is why, and it answers it in the beloved's own handwriting, and so it closes the question forever. Once you have a note, you stop asking anything else. The note becomes the whole explanation, the full stop. No one investigates a death with a note. The police did not, and I did not, and my daughters did not, because the note said what it said in the hand we all knew. And a note like that does not invite you to read it critically. It invites you to collapse. That is precisely why it works as a murder weapon. A gun kills the man. A note in his own hand kills the questions. Gerald did not just need Paul dead. He needed all of us to stop wondering, forever. And the note is what bought him that. And it is genuinely brilliant, in the way that the worst things sometimes are. Gerald was magnificent in those first terrible weeks. I have to give him that, and the giving of it still makes me ill. He was at my side constantly. He handled the funeral arrangements I could not face. He sat with me while I wept. He held my daughters. He spoke at the service, a beautiful eulogy about his best friend, his brother, the finest man he had ever known. And he broke down at the podium and had to be helped to his seat, and the whole church wept with him. And I remember thinking, through my own grief, thank God for Gerald. Thank God I am not alone in this. He was the picture of a grieving best friend. He was so good at it that it never once occurred to me to wonder why he was quite so attentive, quite so present, quite so eager to help with every detail. I have gone back, in memory, to that eulogy so many times, and it curdles a little more each time. Gerald stood up in that church and told a story about Paul from their early days, the two of them broke and sleeping in the warehouse to save money, and he wept telling it, real tears. And I have had to accept that the tears were probably real, that a man can weep with genuine feeling for a person he has murdered, that grief and guilt and self-pity can wear the exact same face. That is the thing about Gerald that I cannot get past even now, that the comfort he gave me was not entirely fake. He did love Paul, in whatever twisted way a man can love the partner he kills over money. And he sat with me and held my hand while I sobbed, and there was warmth in it, and all the while he was the reason I was sobbing. I did not know it was possible for a person to be both of those things at once. I know now. And I keep returning to how present he was, how eager to help with every single detail, and how I read it as devotion when it was something colder. He wanted to handle the funeral, because handling the funeral meant handling the note, meaning he was the one who gently retrieved it from the police for me, who put it in my hands, who made sure the story around it was smooth and settled. He wanted to be close, because close is where you control things. A man who has assembled a forged suicide note does not then wander off and hope for the best. He stays. He manages. He becomes indispensable to the widow so that no thought enters her house that he did not put there. For 15 years, I remembered Gerald's constant presence as the kindest thing anyone did for me. It was not kindness. It was custody. He was guarding his lie, and the thing he was guarding it from was me. And there was the matter of the company, which I could not think about at all in those first weeks, but which had to be dealt with, and Gerald dealt with it. Paul's share of the business passed to me, of course, but I knew nothing about running a distribution company and had no wish to learn. And Gerald, gently, over the following months, explained that the fairest thing, the thing Paul would have wanted, was for me to sell my share to him so that the company could go on and I could have security. And there was that buyout offer still on the table, the one Paul had fought against. And Gerald explained that with Paul gone, it really was the sensible thing. And I signed what he put in front of me, because I trusted him, because he was family, because I was drowning and he was the one holding out a hand. Within a year of Paul's death, Gerald owned it all, bought me out for a fraction of what my share was worth. I would much later understand, and then turned around and sold the whole company for that large sum Paul had refused. Gerald walked away a wealthy man, and I never once, not for years, connected any of it to how my husband died. I want to be honest about the 15 years in between, because they were not years of suspicion. They were years of acceptance. I grieved, I raised my daughters through the rest of their growing up, I went back to work, I built a smaller, quieter life. Gerald stayed in touch for a while, and then drifted, as people do, and I did not think it strange. I believed my husband had killed himself. I believed it so completely that when, now and then, some small thing snagged at me, I brushed it away. The gun I never knew he owned. The fact that Paul, whatever his flaws, was the least self-pitying man I ever knew. A man who met every setback with a grim joke and a plan. The fact that things had actually been looking up in the weeks before he died, that he had seemed, if anything, more determined than despairing. I brushed all of it away because the note was in his handwriting, and the note said goodbye. And who was I to argue with my husband's own last words? There is a particular cruelty to being talked out of your own instincts, and it is worse when the person doing it is yourself. Because it was not only Gerald and the police who closed the door on Paul's death. It was me. Every time some small wrong thing surfaced, the gun, the improving mood, the sheer un-Paulness of it all, I was the one who pushed it back down, because the alternative to suicide was murder, and murder meant someone I knew, and I could not hold that, so I chose the version that only broke my heart, instead of the version that would have burned down my whole understanding of the people around me. I chose the bearable lie. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lot of people do it. Choose the grief that lets them keep their world intact over the truth that would shatter it, and I do not entirely blame the woman I was. But I want to name it. The lie survived 15 years, partly because Gerald built it well, and partly because I helped him hold it up. My daughters grew up in those years as the daughters of a man who had killed himself, and I have to tell you what that did to them, because it is part of the crime and I will not leave it out. My older girl carried a private terror for years that she had inherited whatever broke her father, that despair was a thing waiting in her blood. My younger girl went the other way and got angry at Paul for leaving, angry in a way that poisoned her memories of a father who had adored her. Neither of those things was true. Their father did not despair and did not leave. but they built their adult selves partly around a lie about him. And even now, even with the truth coming out, I do not know that you can fully unbuild that. Gerald did not just take Paul. He reached forward 15 years and shaped the inner lives of Paul's children, and they never knew his hand was on them. The afternoon it changed was 15 years, almost to the week after Paul died. My younger daughter was getting married, and she had asked me for something of her father's to carry down the aisle, and I had gone to the drawer where I kept the small collection of Paul things, his watch, his wedding ring, a few letters. And the note was in there too, because I had never been able to throw it away, and I took it out, meaning only to set it aside. And instead, for the first time in 15 years, I sat down and I read it. Really read it. As words. As a message from a man to his wife. And something stopped me cold at the very end, at the last two words, and I could not for a moment understand what had stopped me, and then I understood, and the floor of my life fell away. The last two words were, "My darling Lori." And here is the thing. Here is the whole thing. Paul never called me Lori. Not once in 26 years. It was the one thing, the one small thing, that Paul was absolutely fixed about. My name is Loretta, and my whole life everyone shortened it to Lori. Everyone, my parents, my friends, my own children, called me nothing but Mom, but referred to me as Lori to others. Everyone in the world called me Lori except Paul. Paul, from the night we met, had refused to. He said Lori was a name for a girl and Loretta was the name of the woman he loved. It was a private thing between us, a little romance of his, 26 years of it. He called me Loretta when he was tender, and Loretta when he was angry, and Loretta in front of company, and Loretta in the dark. He wrote Loretta on every anniversary card, every note left on the counter, every luggage tag. In 26 years, Paul never once, in speech or in writing, called me Lori. And the last words of his suicide note, the note that was supposedly the most intimate and desperate communication of his life, called me Lori. I sat in my bedroom, holding that piece of paper, and I began to shake, because the moment I saw it, I could not unsee it, and it changed the meaning of everything. A man does not, in the final devastated moments of his life, writing the last words he will ever write to the woman he has loved for 26 years, suddenly abandon the one private name he has always called her, and use instead the name he has pointedly refused to use for their entire marriage. It is not possible. It is the one thing that could not happen. Whoever wrote My Darling Lori did not know that Paul never called me Lori. Whoever wrote that note knew me only as the world knew me, as Lori, the name on the outside, the name a person would use if they knew us casually, if they were, say, a business partner and a family friend, but not the husband who lay beside me for 26 years. Whoever wrote that note was not Paul, but it was Paul's handwriting. That was the wall I hit, sitting there shaking. The police had confirmed the handwriting. I had confirmed it myself, in a daze, 15 years ago. It was unmistakably Paul's hand. And it took me a long time, sitting there, to understand how both things could be true, that it was Paul's handwriting and that Paul did not write it as a suicide note. And when I finally understood, it was the coldest thought I have ever had, because there was a way. There had always been a way, sitting in plain sight, and it was this. Those 4 sentences were not 4 sentences. They were fragments. I am so sorry for what I am about to do. I have made a mess of everything, and I cannot see a way out. Please tell the girls I loved them more than my life. Goodbye, my darling Lori. Every one of those sentences was a thing a man might write in a completely different, innocent context, on completely different days, that someone could have collected and arranged. I lay awake the entire first night after I reread the note, and somewhere around dawn, I made myself think it through the way a stranger would, coldly, testing my own terrible idea for holes. Handwriting analysis in the original case had confirmed the note was Paul's. Fine. But confirmed what, exactly? It had confirmed that the words were formed by Paul's hand. It had not asked, because no one had any reason to ask, whether those words had been written all at once, as a note, or on different days, for different reasons, and later brought together. Nobody examines a suicide note as a possible collage, because the whole premise of a suicide note is that it is a single desperate outpouring. The very thing that makes it convincing, that it is unmistakably his handwriting, is the thing that stops anyone from asking the only question that matters. And I realized, lying there, that the forger had not needed to imitate a single stroke. He had needed only to own the originals, to have 20 years of Paul's real writing to choose from, and the patience to find 4 sentences that, laid end to end, sounded like a goodbye. I thought about where each of those sentences might have come from, and the more I thought, the sicker I became. I am so sorry for what I am about to do. A man might write that at the top of a difficult business letter, a hard decision, a layoff, a lawsuit. I have made a mess of everything and I cannot see a way out. A man might write that, or half of it, in a private low moment, in a letter he never sent, or an email, or a note to a friend during a hard time. The very hard time Paul had been having with Gerald that last year. Please tell the girls I loved them more than my life. A man might write that in a card, a will, a sentimental letter home from a trip. And goodbye, my darling Lori. That one I could not place at all, until I could, and when I placed it, my blood went cold. Because it was the salutation and closing of a letter, and the person who assembled the note had needed a closing, and they had reached for how they thought Paul would sign off to his wife, and they had gotten it wrong, because they did not know, because they were not Paul. I understood, sitting there, that someone had taken pieces of my husband's real handwriting from real documents and assembled them into a suicide note. And there was exactly one person in the world who had spent 20 years with access to every document Paul ever wrote, every letter, every card, every scrap of the man's handwriting. A person who knew Paul intimately, but not, it turned out, quite intimately enough. A person who had a very great deal of money to gain from Paul's death, and from the sale of a company Paul had refused to sell. Gerald, the best man, the godfather, the magnificent grieving best friend. I did not have proof. I had a name my husband never called me. But I knew, the way you know things in your body before your mind catches up, that Gerald had killed Paul, and had built the note that hid it out of the pieces of Paul's own hand, and had comforted me at the funeral, and had bought my silence and my share for a fraction of their worth, and had walked away rich, and had gotten away with all of it for 15 years. And once I let myself see Gerald in it, everything from that last year rearranged, the way a room rearranges when you finally spot the thing that was hidden in it all along. The low, furious phone calls, the buyout Paul would not agree to, Gerald's certainty, in the months after, that selling was what Paul would have wanted, when I knew for a fact it was the exact opposite of what Paul wanted, when fighting the sale had been the great stress of Paul's final year. I had signed away my share to the one man who profited from every part of it, the death, the note, the sale, and I had thanked him for his kindness while I did it. He had wanted the company sold. Paul was the only obstacle. And then Paul was gone. In a locked building Gerald had every right to be in, with a note built from documents only Gerald had spent 20 years collecting, and Gerald had the sale closed and the widow bought out inside a year. I had been looking at the whole shape of it for 15 years. I had simply refused to let the pieces touch. I did not do anything foolish. I had learned, in a whole life, that a woman with a terrible certainty and no proof is a woman who gets dismissed, or worse. So I was careful. I did not call Gerald. I did not call my daughters, not yet, because I could not bear to detonate their father's death a second time on nothing but a hunch and a name. Instead, I gathered. I still had boxes of Paul's papers in the attic, 15 years of a life I had never been able to sort, and I went up there, and I spent weeks going through every page, looking for the originals, the real documents those 4 sentences had been lifted from. And I found them. Not all, but enough. I found a business letter Paul had drafted, in his hand, that began, "I am so sorry for what I am about to do," about terminating a contract. I found a page torn from a legal pad, a private venting, the kind of thing a stressed man writes and never sends, that contained, "I have made a mess of everything and I cannot see a way out." the sentences existed, in Paul's real handwriting, in innocent contexts, predating his death. The note had been assembled from his life. I want to describe those weeks in the attic, because they were the strangest of my life. 15 years I had not been able to open those boxes, and now I could not stay out of them. An old woman sitting cross-legged under a bare bulb in the dust, reading her dead husband's business correspondence at 2 in the morning, hunting for sentences. It felt insane even as I did it. Some nights I was sure I was a lonely widow who had lost her grip, inventing a conspiracy to avoid the plain, sad fact of a suicide. And then I would find another one. Another sentence from the note, sitting there in a real letter, in a real context, in Paul's real hand, months or years before he died. Each one I found steadied me and sickened me in equal measure. By the end I had them almost all, laid out on the attic floor in a row, the innocent originals, and above them a photocopy of the note. And you could see it, you could actually see the note being built out of the life, and I sat up there and wept. Not from grief this time, but from a kind of terrible vindication. Because I was not crazy, I had never been crazy. The wrongness I had felt for 15 years had been real all along. With that, at last, I had more than a feeling. I had documents. I had a note that used a name my husband never used, and I had the innocent originals of its sentences, and together they were something a serious person could not wave away. So I took it all, the note and the source documents, and 15 years of certainty, to the authorities, and this time, because it was evidence and not grief. They listened. They reopened the case. And I want to tell you that the reopening did what the original investigation never had, which was to actually examine Gerald, his finances at the time, his whereabouts that morning, which had never been closely checked because no one had ever suspected there was a crime, the buyout he had wanted and Paul had refused, and how conveniently Paul's death had cleared the way. The document examiners looked at the note again, this time asking the question no one had asked in 15 years, which was not, is this Paul's handwriting, but was this written as a single continuous note or assembled from pieces? And the answer, under real scrutiny, was damning. I want to say a word about the police, because it would be easy to be angry at them for closing it so fast 15 years ago, and for a while I was. But I have come to understand that they did what the evidence in front of them said to do. A locked building, a private gun, a note in the dead man's own hand, a man under real and documented stress. There was, on the surface, nothing to investigate, and the thing that would have cracked it open, the wrong name, was a thing only one person on Earth could have caught, and that person was me, and I was too destroyed to catch it. The system is built to accept a note, and the note was very good. I do not blame the young detective who signed off on it 15 years ago. I blame the man who built the note. And I have made a kind of peace with the fact that some truths simply cannot surface until the one person who holds the missing piece is finally ready and strong enough to look. It has taken time, more time than I want to describe, the machinery of a reopened death grinding slowly. But it moved, and it is still moving, and Gerald, the best man, the godfather, is at last being made to answer for what I believe with my whole soul he did to my husband 15 years ago. I go to what proceedings I can bear to. I have seen his face, older now, prosperous, and I have watched him watch me, and I have seen in his eyes the thing I needed to see, which is that he knows that I know, and that the small private word he got wrong 15 years ago, the word he could not have known to get right, is the thread that finally unraveled him. He was so careful. He thought of everything. He knew Paul's handwriting, Paul's business, Paul's despair, Paul's daughters. He knew everything about my husband, except the one thing only I knew, which is what my husband called me in the dark. I did finally tell my daughters, before it became public, because I could not let them learn it from anyone but me. That was the hardest conversation of my life, harder than telling them their father was dead in the first place, because this time I was not delivering a grief, I was reopening one and turning it inside out. I sat them both down, and I told them that their father had not left them, had never chosen to leave them, that the belief they had each built their private wounds around was a lie, and that the man who told the lie was the man who had stood at the podium and wept and been Uncle Gerald their whole lives. I watched 15 years of their inner architecture crack in real time. And then I watched something else happen, something I had not expected, which was a kind of terrible relief, especially in my older girl. The one who had feared despair was in her blood. It was not in her blood. Her father had not despaired. Something loosened in her that day that had been clenched for 15 years. And if the reopening of this case does nothing else, it has already done that, and that alone was worth every hard thing it cost. The first time I was in a room with Gerald after I knew, I was afraid I would come apart, and instead, a great cold steadiness came over me, and I simply looked at him. And he looked back, and I watched him understand that I understood. And I want to tell you there was no triumph in it, only a kind of vast sadness, because this was a man who had been at my wedding, who had carried my daughter on his shoulders, and he had done this, and he had let me thank him for it, and he had taken the money and lived a good life on it for 15 years, while 3 people he called family carried a wound he had inflicted on purpose. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say. He got the one thing wrong that he could not have known to get right, and it was the smallest and most intimate thing, and it was enough, and we both knew it, and I let the silence say all of that, and then I looked away, because he was not worth the ache in my neck. I think about that a great deal now. That Gerald, who was family for 20 years, who was at the wedding and the christenings and the holidays, did not know that Paul never called me Lori. It was too small a thing, too private, the kind of thing that lives only between 2 people and dies with them, or nearly does. And it was the thing that saved the truth. Paul could not speak for himself, could not tell me he had not chosen to leave me, could not name the man who took his life. But he had spent 26 years insisting on my true name as an act of love, and that insistence, that stubborn, tender private habit, reached across 15 years and the grave itself to tell me, in the end, that the last words I thought were his were a forgery. My name was the message. It was the one part of him that could not be counterfeited, because the man who counterfeited the rest never knew it existed. I have made my peace, as much as a person can, with the 15 years I lost to the lie. I grieve them. The years I spent believing my husband had chosen to abandon us. The years I let my daughters believe their father had done that to them. The quiet damage that belief did to all 3 of us. The way it changed how we remembered him, made him smaller and more broken than he was. He was not broken. He did not leave us. He was taken from us by a man he trusted over money. And then that man reached into the wreckage and forged a goodbye to make us believe our own beloved had done the leaving. That is the cruelest part, crueler even than the killing. It was not enough to take Paul's life. Gerald took his good name too, made him a suicide, made his daughters the daughters of a man who gave up, and let us carry that for 15 years while he spent the money. People ask me, sometimes, whether finding the truth has brought me peace, and I never quite know how to answer. Because the honest answer is that it has brought me something better than peace and worse than peace at the same time. It has given Paul back to me as the man he really was, not a man who gave up, but a man who was fighting for what he built right up to the last morning of his life, a man who kissed me goodbye and meant to come home. That is a gift beyond price, to have my true husband restored. And in the same motion, it has taken away the small mercy that suicide, for all its pain, at least allowed, which was that no one did this to him on purpose. Now I know someone did. Now I know the last thing my husband felt was not despair, but betrayal. The face of his oldest friend in a room he could not leave. I would not trade the truth back, but I will not pretend it is a comfort. It is just the truth, and the truth was owed to him, and now, at last, he has it. So if I have one thing to say to you, after all of this, it is about reading the note, whatever your note is, the document you have accepted, the official version, the thing everyone told you was closed and clear, and not to be questioned. The story you have held so many times, it has stopped being words and become only a smooth-worn place you press to feel the old pain, Read it. Actually read it, one word at a time, as if you had never seen it before, as if you were a stranger encountering it fresh. The truth was in my husband's note from the very first day. It was in the fourth sentence. It was in one small wrong name that everyone, including me, read straight past for 15 years. Because we were feeling the note instead of reading it. The people who build lies out of the pieces of our lives are counting on exactly that. That we will hurt too much to ever look closely. Look closely. Somewhere in the note there may be a word that only you would know is wrong, and that word may be the whole truth, waiting all these years for you to finally be ready to see it.